Hello and welcome to April's Q&A from Patreon. I'm Matt, the host here on Three Skulls Tavern, and this will be made public at some point in the future, but for now this is going to be a Patreon exclusive, and of course only Patreon supporters can ask me questions for these videos. If you're interested in becoming a Patreon supporter, then if you just check this link just here, there's also a hyperlink in the description that'll take you to my Patreon page. Anyway, so jumping straight into it, I've got 3 questions this month. The first one is from #FarmLife, and the question is, I'm planning a solo West Marches game using Google Maps, essentially getting my characters across a sparsely populated post-apocalyptic US. Think The Stand. Oh, just checking my mic was on. Think The Stand without the BBEG. BBEG being Big Bad Evil Guy, I think. I'm not thinking about adding any actual mutants or monsters, just people trying to survive. So kind of like The Road, actually, sounds like. Yeah, cool. Would it be better to use Forbidden Lands or the Mutant Year Zero rule sets, or maybe the One Ring 2nd Edition, in your opinion? Something else entirely? Okay. I guess the big question is, do you want to sell this on? Because if you want to sell it on, then I would recommend not using the One Ring as a, as a rule set. But it sounds like you just want to play something. You're planning a game to play with a group, and in that case, you can really use anything. I wouldn't use the One Ring because the One Ring has very specific mechanics geared towards telling the types of stories that you find in the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit, and that doesn't really suit post-apocalyptic survival, in my opinion. I mean, you're talking contemporary as well. I would probably look at Twilight 2000 for its, not for its core rules, and especially not its combat, because it's very, very crunchy, but for a lot of the mechanics it has around journeying and random encounters and that sort of thing, because that really amps up the tension more than definitely more than Forbidden Lands does with its random encounters. You basically have a random encounter potentially happening every shift, I believe, like every quarter day, if you will, in Twilight 2000. Whereas in Forbidden Lands, it's only happening when you enter a new hex. So that means really things can be happening at any time, and it's a really good system, and if you're already thinking of doing something kind of contemporary, it's pretty much there. You just have to kind of rewrite the random encounters a bit to take into account that it's not to do with a nuclear apocalypse, and that it's not very military based, unless that's what you're going for. I guess the other big thing is, what's the nature of the apocalypse, because that kind of defines where you're going to be looking. Is it a nuclear apocalypse, in which case Twilight 2000 really is a good fit for a lot of the sub mechanics or the subsystems. Otherwise, it just really depends what the apocalypse is. Is it some sort of like pathogen, like super COVID or something, or I don't know. Is it aliens? I mean, you said no mutants or monsters, so aliens kind of sounds like monsters a bit in my head. But yeah, I guess there's something that's wiped out a lot of the human race. So is that still contagious? There's things you need to think about with that sort of thing. Like if it's something that you could potentially make you sick and make you die as well, like radiation or like a zombie plague or a plague of some description, there needs to be mechanics for catching that. And I think already there are ways to do that. Certainly the radiation that you find, there's a radiation mechanic in Twilight 2000, for example. I've worked on a zombie game myself, and in that one it's going with the kind of usual zombie tropes like from The Walking Dead, and that is simply, if you get bitten, you're going to turn, and it's only a matter of time. So there's like this clock that's ticking before it happens. You're never exactly sure when it's going to happen, but it will definitely happen. So you could do something like that as well. But in terms of using a base system or a rule set for it, I mean, certainly any of the post-apocalyptic ones that you've mentioned is probably more like Forbidden Lands, I would maybe say, because it's a bit more geared towards survival and towards hex exploration. That's probably a good place to start. It's just you would have to do a little bit of work to maybe reskin it for a contemporary setting. But I mean, a good place to start would be looking at the skills actually in Twilight 2000, because they map more towards, albeit a little bit more of a militaristic setting. It's contemporary, right? And Forbidden Lands is very much medieval in its kind of like focus. So yeah, I think definitely the 16 skills. I personally prefer more skills rather than fewer skills, generally speaking. It just depends what you're going for. And I think for survival, well, I mean, there's arguments one way or the other. I actually was going to do this Year Zero mini survival game, which turned into Year Zero Light. And yeah, I was using kind of the alien rule set as like the basis, and I was using everything from Alien, hardly reskinning anything in it, just a little bit of reskin on the skills, I think, slightly. I was using the stress mechanic from it because I thought that would work really, really well for a zombie apocalypse, because obviously zombies could attack at any minute. It's extremely tense and stressful all the time. So that's another possibility for a rule set. The one thing I hadn't quite got around to was porting in the exploration mechanics, but I was planning on going to Twilight 2000 for that. So I don't really have a golden bullet answer to your question, unfortunately, but that's kind of the way my brain would sort of work towards it, is kind of scavenge from Twilight 2000 a lot of the subsystems to do with exploration and random encounters. And for a core rule set, I mean, ideally go with whatever you know best and tweak that, I would suggest. If you're talking Year Zero engine, Year Zero mini would be very easy to do. Because there's not a lot there, and it would work very well, I think, for that sort of genre anyway. I certainly found it very easy to tweak for my zombie apocalypse one. Okay, so hopefully that helped a little bit. Yeah, but it's a bit of a, I mean, I kind of, maybe to give you a bit more of a directed answer, I might need to know a little bit more about the nature of the apocalypse. But yeah, it's a cool idea. I've read The Stand. I really, really enjoyed The Stand. I really enjoy The Road as well. So you're kind of barking up the tree that I really enjoy, also barking up. If I can use that weird analogy there. So yeah, sounds cool. Okay, second question is from Attila. Hi Matt, how are you? I'm good, thanks. What game IP would you like to see after Call of Cthulhu and Blade Runner? Oh boy. Oh god. I don't know, to be honest. I've been reading. I'd like to see maybe another fantasy game from Free League. We've got Forbidden Lands, which feels very specific type of fantasy. It's very much in a certain genre. What I would really like to see would be a human-centric take on fantasy, and an IP that I'm very, very familiar with and enjoy quite a bit. In fact, I'm listening to the audiobook trilogy. I'm on the third book right now, currently, is the First Law trilogy by Joe Abercrombie. It's just, yeah, I mean, I don't know. It'd either be that or it'd be something very different, which would be weird fantasy, and that would be the Baz Lag trilogy by China Miéville, starting with Perdido Street Station. Either of those two, I think, would be really awesome to see. I know China Miéville is familiar with role-playing. There was, at some point, he was getting involved with an OSR or D&D-ish sort of spin of his game, but it was being made by Zach Smith back before Zach Smith was kind of outed as being a complete waste of space. And yeah, I think that probably is unlikely to happen again, because I think when an author starts kind of getting engaged with making a role-playing game, it's quite niche, right? This little hobby of ours. And if it ends up like kind of not going anywhere, or it kind of like gets involved with politics within the industry, and it just kind of stops, it probably leaves a sour taste in their mouth, I would imagine, and it's maybe unlikely that it's going to get taken further. And that was certainly many, many, many years ago. So I unfortunately that would probably be my top, actually, because the Baslag trilogy is, although I've only read the first two books, Perdido Street Station and The Scar, those are probably some of my favorite books of all time. I really, really love them, and I love the world building. I love the settings. I would love to see or experience, run, play games in that setting, and yeah, that's probably my top pick. After that, maybe Joe Abercrombie's First Law trilogy, just because the world building seems kind of interesting. It's interesting. It's actually, the world building isn't so interesting in that. It's just the stories are quite good. He's got a nice way of doing storytelling, but I'm not sure it would make for a role-playing game that feels particularly unique. So maybe not that one so much, although I do enjoy the books. So yeah, I think I'll go with the Baslag trilogy. But really, I think any kind of fantasy would be cool to see. And there's so much fantasy fiction around. I think one of the more modern iterations of fantasy, and again, I think either going with something like weird fantasy or fantasy with with just humans, so it's a bit more kind of humanocentric, would be more interesting to me, rather than yet another iteration of Tolkien-based fantasy. And I mean, to be fair, they've just done Free League have just done The One Ring, which is very traditional fantasy. So I imagine their fantasy itch, and they've got Symbaroum. They're just coming out with Ruins of Symbaroum. So really, outside of the Year Zero engine, Free League do have quite a lot going on in terms of fantasy between Forbidden Lands, Symbaroum, and The One Ring. So I imagine the appetite is probably not very high for that. Outside of the fantasy space, oh man, I mean, sci-fi they've kind of got covered. They've got Coriolis, which is space opera. They've got Alien, which is space horror. They've got Blade Runner, which is like near future dystopia. A lot of people have said they'd love to see a more traditional cyberpunk sort of game, but I don't think that's something we're likely to see. It's not something I'm particularly that interested in either. I'm quite actually interested in Terminal State, which is a third-party one that's coming out hopefully soon, using the Twilight 2000 rule set. But yeah, Star Wars, I mean, although rewatching it with my wife, Star Wars is pretty cringy. It's something I grew up with. I know it inside and out. It was the first role-playing game I ever played was the West End Games Star Wars game. So in theory, if they were to get the Star Wars IP, which could happen, I guess. I mean, they got the One Ring, they've got the Alien, they've got some really big IPs. If they were to get the Star Wars one and do something like Year Zero engine with it, first of all, I would love to be involved. I freaking love the world. Anyway, I'm sure a lot of people would love to get involved, and a lot of people know the world of Star Wars because it's so massive. But I think that would be kind of a cool one too. I'm already working on my own called Space Rebels, which is a Year Zero mini. Might be Year Zero Light, sort of kids focused, like unofficial hack of Star Wars. That's been really fun. I've been kind of playtesting it with my son, and that works really well. It's kind of like taking the Year Zero engine and taking West End Games Star Wars and kind of like fitting them together a bit, because there is actually quite a bit of synergy between them, and then coming up with something and then like pulling it right back so it's very, very much kid friendly. Bearing in mind my son is only 6 years old. And yeah, we've played it a bit, play tested it a little bit, and it works fine. It's just my son prefers to play pretend without the dice, generally speaking. So anytime the dice have to come out, it's kind of slows the pretend storytelling down, and he kind of, doesn't enjoy it so much. So give him time. Yeah, I'm just looking at my shelf with the kind of fiction I've got, and I can't really think of anything else that hasn't already been done. Warhammer 40k, again, I mean, that's not going to leave Cuba. Oh, God. If Free League got the Warhammer franchise, like, oh, God, I mean, I'd feel really bad for Cubicle 7. They've already lost the One Ring to Free League. Losing Warhammer would be a massive, massive blow. But I really did not like Wrath and Glory, the current 40k game. I think it's really horribly designed. And it's also a D6 dice pool game, which ties basically a lot of similarities, as most D6 dice pool games have, to the Year Zero engine. It would be fairly easy to make a hack of Wrath and Glory, but Wrath and Glory from a design goal perspective. So like the kind of design goals for it are not really great in my opinion. I think it would need a lot of tightening up, and it would need a lot of work. But the core mechanics, there's some interesting things that it does there, and I think Wrath and Glory could fit really well. In fact, anything Warhammer could work really well with the Year Zero engine. I mean, I'm working myself on a Warhammer Fantasy roleplay hack, and it would fit really well. Other than that, I don't know. That's quite a lot of them I'm throwing out there. There's no real magic bullet. I would love to see, I guess, the Baslag trilogy, but it's unlikely to happen. So yeah. All right. I can't think of anything else. Last question, jumping over to my Discord, and this is from Lord Yod. Can you talk about your workflow for producing content and actual plays? In particular, I'm curious about the audio effects you used in, for example, the Coriolis AP. Okay, let's start with the Coriolis actual play, which I'm assuming is from Mud and Blood and not from my YouTube channel, because that's the first actual play I ever did. And the workflow was we recorded it all individually in Audacity. So we had like a Skype call or whatever we were using back before Zoom was around. Maybe it was Discord audio, I don't remember. But we were recording individually, locally on our computers with Audacity. We would do a clap off so I could like line up all of our audio separately afterwards. And then I basically was pulling everyone's tracks together from the actual play into Audacity, and then I was going through and I was basically, chopping out dead air and removing my ums because there were a lot of them, and really just spending a hell of a lot of time on effectively, I think it was like 1 hour episodes. It might have even been shorter. I think every episode was a little bit less than an hour. And I just remember it taking, 6 to 12 hours per episode. This 1 hour of content just was a ton of work. And we got better on Mud and Blood anyway with subsequent actual plays where it didn't take as long, and we kind of managed to tidy up our workflow, etc. But really it was just involved, it was taking the audio. First thing would be to look at people's audio which wasn't so clean, that they didn't have a very good mic, trying to clean up that audio feed before you start chopping and changing it up altogether. Then cutting out people typing, people eating, drinking, like all that kind of stuff that distracts in an audio format. Then it's finding ambient music to go underneath, finding sound effects, making sound effects. So most of the sound effects in Coriolis I made myself. From memory, I remember like the last episode there was a chant happening. There was like some cultists, and I actually just kind of like made up and sang a chant. And then kind of like used Audacity to put some filters on it in Audacity to make it a bit more like otherworldly, and had it really quietly playing in the background. So little things like that. Really, I was just messing around with Audacity filters, Googling most of the time because I really hadn't done it before, and figuring out as I went. So that was the Coriolis AP. That was audio only for podcasts. So that's very, very different to what I do now on this channel. On this channel, the overlays, which is basically, this is right now what you're seeing here, this little bar at the bottom here, that's a pretty simple overlay, right? I can take that off, and away it goes. I can put it back on, and I can really put up anything I want onto the screen here. In fact, I can even, like, I can change the size of my, of my video feed. I can move it around. I can duplicate my video feed if I wanted to. I can do lots and lots of stuff live with what's called OBS for actual plays. And that's what I use a lot of the time. So I spend a lot of time in prep setting up these overlays in Photoshop, which are effectively a bunch of, PNGs, backgroundless PNGs that I can stick into OBS and arrange around the screen. So in terms of visuals, that's what I tend to do. For the solo actual play, we actually do a bit of editing on that. So I'm actually recording twice. I'm recording 2 feeds simultaneously. One is like it is now with just me in front of the webcam, and the second one is a different overlay on another instance of OBS called Streamlabs OBS, which is a slightly different program, but I can run them simultaneously, record simultaneously, and I then get basically 2 feeds, right? It's kind of like although I only have one camera pointing at me, I'm recording 2 feeds at the same time. And that way, in editing, we have 2 video feeds that we can basically chop between. The second feed, by the way, is looking at Foundry Virtual Tabletop. And that way, when I'm just role-playing and you don't need to be looking at Foundry, you can have this scene right here where you're just looking at my face. And anytime I'm doing something in Foundry, we have that basically the entirety of the recording is there, and we can just kind of like fade it in and fade it back out when it's needed. Audio, if I'm doing a GM'd campaign, in fact, I think with all of it right now, I don't record with any audio. So if you watch any of the live streams, currently, there won't be any audio ambient. So none of the players hear it. I don't hear it. It's not happening. And then what we do is I record them, and after they've been recorded, they go through editing as well. But the GM stuff and everything, the GM stuff and the solo stuff, they all go through editing, and they get an ambient. That's one of the things that they all get is an ambient track that runs on a loop in the background, and it could change at various points in the game, if the situation demands it. In terms of sound effects, we do some sound effects. We try and keep it to a minimum because this isn't a really heavily edited show. But if there are some, then we'll pull them out of. I'm trying to remember what the website's called. It's called like Zap something, Zap FX or something like that. And it has. You can use the sound effects for free as long as you give attribution, which we do if we're using them in the description for the video. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So I don't know if that really talked about it workflow wise. I mean, there's a lot of stuff I'm doing in the background in terms of getting a video ready. I have to prepare a video in YouTube Studio. That means having a thumbnail graphic for it so that when I share the link, it pops up with a thumbnail graphic. And when people click on the link to get a reminder, it's also that graphic is showing in the background. So that's one thing I create for every video. I do it myself. I actually do a lot of graphic design, and I have had Photoshop for a very long time because I also did some amateur photography for a while, kind of semi-professionally. So I've used Photoshop a lot, and I know how to use the program very, very well. So I can create these sort of overlays fairly easily. And then I have to do descriptions, and I have to think about links that I might be using, popping the links in there. Then that's the YouTube Studio video ready to go. Then I share that link across social media when it's needed. Then I have to get the feeds ready. And one other thing, I guess, about prep with actual plays is if I'm playing with more than one person, then there's a lot of fiddling that goes on directly before we start recording, where I have to get the video feeds lined up with where they're going to go. Because I'm using OBS, there are actually other software programs and solutions that do this a little bit more automatically, but most of them are paid, and OBS Studio is open source, so I kind of prefer to use the free and open source version, and I've been using it for so long now, over a year, that I'm quite used to it. So although I know it might speed up my workflow a bit if I was to use something else, I kind of prefer the system I'm already using. So basically, I have to wait until everyone's on the call. I use Zoom. I have a professional subscription to Zoom, so we can use it without any issues. And once everyone's arrived, the problem with Zoom is that you can't specify where people appear in a call. It's always kind of semi-random in terms of like who's first, who's second, who's third, who's fourth, for example. And therefore, I can't set up an overlay, which is always static. I'm always moving video feeds around because it's changed from the last time. And that's pretty annoying. But it's part of the game, so that's basically something I have to do. That means if somebody is a bit late, if a player is late showing up to a call, if the live stream is due to be starting at 9 o'clock, and a player doesn't rock up until 2 minutes till 9, we're going to be late because I need time to get them the overlay sorted before we can start recording. So that gets a little bit annoying sometimes, and I mean, it does happen. People, like, real life happens, and it's unavoidable sometimes. But yeah, it's part of the game, really. And I guess that's, I mean, I don't know what else to talk about. If there are even more specific questions, then feel free to hit me up or ask them for next month's Q&A if you want. I mean, there's so much that goes on behind the scenes for these things, and my workflow really changes depending on what kind of content is being produced, in terms of what's being just live streamed, what's being edited, in which case it's recorded in advance, and then it goes through editing, a review, and then it goes live. I mean, there's just a lot of different moving parts. And of course, Patreon content as well, that also gets handled a bit differently, where it goes up as an unlisted video on YouTube initially, so that Patreon supporters are the only ones who can view it. And then at some point it has to be switched to public. But I can't schedule them to go public at a certain date, because as soon as I do that, it switches off it from being an unlisted video, and that means any Patreon supporters that weren't able to watch it live but could watch it before the public release, the link will then break. So I have to make sure that it stays unlisted until right before it goes public, and then switch it myself manually, and that's a little bit annoying. There are ways around that. I could make a copy of the video, and I could have that queued up to go live, and then just keep the Patreon specific one as like an unlisted one forever. But I tend, for some videos, that doesn't really make a lot of sense, because it's just either I'm not recording it to start off with, or it's just a lot of work for what's effectively kind of a video that doesn't need a lot of extra work. And this all cuts into other free time I have to work on game design or spend time with my family. Bearing in mind I have a baby at home, and my wife already isn't happy that with the amount of time that I spend doing all this other stuff. So my time is quite precious, and yeah, if it doesn't really need that extra touch, then I'm happy for it to be something I have to manually remember, set a reminder for myself or whatever. But yeah, if you have any other questions about my workflow, more specific ones, I'm happy to talk about it. Drop it in either next month's Q&A post, or ask me on Discord or whatever, and I'll go into more detail. Okay, those were all of my questions for this month, so thank you very much to my 3 Patreon supporters this month that asked questions. And for the rest of you that have questions, in early May, I think like the 5th of May is when I've got the next post scheduled to go live. So wait for that to pop up. When it pops up, feel free to ask me anything you want. And yeah, and I'll tackle it next month. Okay, thanks very much, and catch you next month.